welcome to the Firehouse Roundtable podcast, brought to you by the Ventura Fire Foundation. I'm one of your hosts, Peter McKenzie, retired fire captain with the City of Ventura Fire Department, and my co-host, Jason Kay, active battalion chief with the City of Ventura Fire Department. We are going to bring awareness to real issues that face firefighters and their families. We want you to feel like you have a seat at the kitchen table, which every firefighter knows is the heart of the firehouse. Let's get right into the episode. All right, welcome to another episode of the Firehouse Roundtable. I'm your host, Peter McKenzie, and today we have a guest host with us who also happens to be the newest member of the Ventura Fire Foundation. We have Derrick Bean with us. Welcome to the show, Derrick.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here too. You're kind of an up-and-comer, dynamic mover and shaker in the department, and we were glad to get you on the board of the foundation. But as far as what we're talking about today, we have a very special guest, Chief David Rhodes. And just I'll give a quick bio about him before we bring him in and start the conversation. Looks like he's a 38-year veteran of the fire service from Atlanta, Georgia. He also is the editor-in-chief for Fire Engineering magazine, which I think one or two firemen may have heard of. Educational director for the FDIC conference, chief elder for the Georgia Smoke Diver program. We'll have to get into that. Let's welcome Chief Rhodes to the show. Welcome, Chief.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on too. We doing our research. There's quite a bit to talk about, but why don't we start with just give our listeners a little context, who you are, kind of what you're about in a brief manner, if you can.
Sure. I started in the fire service at a small suburban department outside of Atlanta, Conyers, Georgia, in 1985. Worked there until 92, where I went to the city of Atlanta and did 30 years there. Got involved with the Fire Department Instructors Conference and Fire Engineering magazine somewhere probably mid-90s, and ended up being a hands-on training instructor there for a couple of years, and then got asked to help on the management side to help with logistics and running the hands-on training. So I moved over to that, did that for over 20 years for a couple of different bosses over the course of that time, and started when Bill Manning was the editor-in-chief and did the keynote speech at FDIC, I think in 2000, and just kept contributing, writing, and getting articles published, and then worked for Bobby Halton for 18 years while he was the editor. And then once I retired from Atlanta, he started after me to come to work and sort of shadow him in a transition. He said he had about 3 years left in him, and that was in August, and unfortunately he passed away in December. So instead of my 3-year mentorship in the position, I got 3 months. But I had worked with him for 18 years, so I'd kind of been around. It wasn't like walking into a brand new deal, but I've definitely learned a lot in the last couple of years, for sure.
Yeah, there's so much there to start talking about. I think one of the first questions I have for you is you've worked in now the public sector as a firefighter, and then also in the private sector for this, Fire Engineering magazine. What's that like? What are the differences between the two?
I would say, well, and put it in perspective, 38 years of public and 2 private. The 2 private have been a lot less bureaucratic, for sure. Like, it seems we get a lot done quickly, and it's just kind of a different vibe. The 38 years in public was phenomenal from the boots on the ground service delivery side, but it was very, very frustrating on the getting things done and being, creative, innovative, and they say, what is it? The bureaucracy, and it's the bigger the department, the bigger the bureaucracy, and the bigger the city government, the bigger the bureaucracy. So
yeah,
that part was 38 years of frustration, but it was offset by the fact that you're serving the public. So It kind of made it worth it. A couple good fires. It's kind of like golf. You make that one good shot in 18 holes and it brings you back. You have that one fire or that one good call where you know you made a difference, then you put up with a bunch of crap for the next time.
I would say that what you just said resonates with me, because I didn't do 38 years. I did 20 years in the fire department, and then I'm now in the private sector running my own company. And to compare the two is like they're not even on the same planet. Like, you can get stuff done in the private sector like lightning speed. And if you need to be more efficient, you need to change something, you need to hire somebody, like it's I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's just different. Whereas the frustrating part about the fire service, similar echo what you're saying, like it's like nails on a chalkboard trying to do anything, like anything that's not like the norm that we already do. And that's extremely frustrating. That was frustrating for me. And I try very hard in my own business to not bring that part of the fire service into it.
Same here. Yeah. And I think, it's like a different level of accountability, because there's goals and there's certain benchmarks for your budget and things like that. And like, if somebody's not producing, then it's like pretty easy transition to get somebody else, or more resources or a different talent skill or what have you. But fire department, it's almost like playing poker, but you can't swap out any cards. You got to play the hand you're dealt every day.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, because I mean, not to get controversial right off the bat, but so
why not? Let's go for
it. The fire service, right? Once you're off probation, it's very difficult to fire a firefighter. I mean, it has to be something pretty egregious, right? I think everybody kind of understands that. But that leaves people who aren't really contributors and people who are involved trying to affect change from the inside. I listened to one of your recent speeches that I want to talk about. That's the struggle of the fire department, though. You have I mean, sounds negative, but probably the majority of the guys aren't interested in getting super involved to make changes and, better the organization. In my experience, it's a small percentage of people who are willing to raise their hand, get involved, do the committees, do the different programs that the fire department has. How do you see that? Because I feel, and this tags into another thing that I want to talk about, is the generational differences of firefighters, like the generation before mine and the generation after me. There's some pretty clear differences, and they're impacting the fire service.
Yeah.
And you're someone that has a lot of experience and a lot of connections. So let's just open that and start chit-chatting about that. I know that was probably 3 questions in there, so feel free to ask.
I have no idea scientifically if it's correct or not, but I guess the combination of stuff that I've read and researched is sort of the 10% self-starter motivator. They're the ones that are sort of your elite level thinkers that are always trying to collaborate, trying to, make things better, whether it's a new training program. They're outside of their box. They're outside of their organization, learning and trying to bring stuff back. And then you got about 80% who are good employees, and if they're given the right resources, training, and all function well, and they're good to above average, members of the organization. And then you just have 10% that shouldn't be there, and that seems, to be pretty consistent all around, somewhere in that neighborhood. And depending on the leadership of the organization, which I worked in both types, but if you're in like a toxic type environment, that 10% that is innovative and all are the only ones that ever get in trouble. They're the only ones. They have a target on their back because they don't mean to make anybody look bad. They just want to do their thing and make things better. But unfortunately, the result is they do make people who aren't doing things look bad, and they make them look lazy, or they make them look like they don't know what they're doing. And it's, I guess, human nature for somebody that's a fire chief or an officer or whatever to like try to beat them back down into the bucket, so that they're not exposing, anybody else. And the majority of people that I know in that thing, they aren't trying to make people look bad. They're just trying to move forward and be professional. So that's a difficult time in anybody's career to be in that group. And then, of course, we all probably fall into different buckets depending on what the issue in the work is. So you could have somebody that is like top tier, elite level on the fire side, on fire issues and fire training and all, but their job also entails EMS, and they don't really care for EMS. So they kind of let themselves fall off into that 10% at the low end on EMS. So it's not that you're always the same across the board. You kind of fit into different buckets depending on what your interests are and all. But there are, I would still say there's 10% that whatever it is that they're supposed to do, they're going to be like a lead at it, or they're going to be,
what advice do you have for firefighters who, that scenario you just described, where their outside of the box thinking is not welcomed with open arms and they are being kind of stamped back down? Like, what advice do you have for them?
Get outside of your organization and contribute elsewhere. Not leave necessarily, but like find an outlet, whether it's, teaching at the state academy or a regional academy, whether it's getting involved in something like FDIC. I say with all the crazy stuff that happened to me over my career and different chiefs and, being union president and fighting those battles, the thing that kept me sane and in the business was all of my outside stuff. Because I had Georgia smoke divers where, I was with people that were probably the 1%, of that 10%. And then I had FDIC, I had fire engineering, and I had my own little training group. And so you've got to get your professional satisfaction, your ability to feel that you're contributing and making things better somewhere. And if you can't do it in your organization, then you have to go outside it. That's why there's 8,000 firefighter owned training companies right now. Because, 20 years ago, it was the state academy, the national academy, and your local department fire academy. That's where all the training came from. Now, there's 3 or 4 conferences every week. So that's usually not 100%, but I would be willing to bet, and it'd be awesome if some psychologist would study this. Out of all the firefighters that own their own training company, how many of them feel that they cannot adequately contribute within their own organization? And
that would be interesting.
Yeah,
I bet you.
I guarantee it's at least 75%.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so by contrast, you've worked for administrations where they did welcome the outside the box thinking, or
absolutely. My first department.
What's the difference?
My first department was all about training, making you better. The policies reflected it. So if you wanted to go to a training class, there was no question of, well, we don't have enough people that day or blah, blah, blah. It was yes. And, if it was an 8-hour class at the state academy, which we were pretty lucky, we were only probably an hour and a half, 2 hours away. But if you went to training that day, you didn't have to come back to work at night if your class was more than one day. So like if your class was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you were scheduled to work Tuesday. A lot of departments would make you come back in for the night shift, then drive back down, or they would make you take vacation time. And ours, you were approved. It didn't matter what staffing was. They would bring somebody in, or they would run short. So that was just a whole different mentality. And then they empowered, at 2 years in that department, I was in charge of the new wellness program, which we didn't call it that. It was just a physical fitness program. And they let me like test every single person on the job with a like a baseline type form. And I was able to create stats and customize a workout plan for each individual firefighter with 2 years on the job.
Yeah, that's crazy. This brings up a something that you mentioned, struck a nerve with me. So it sounds like that first department was a smaller department than Atlanta, obviously.
Yeah, one station, 20-person department.
So, yeah, so where Derrick and I
versus an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, where Derrick and I come from is also a small department. We're 6. I guess you guys are going to be 7 stations here soon, but a lot of times the guys in the smaller organizations wear more hats, right? Like you just don't have the personnel to have, one dedicated person to every single program and whatnot. But I think a lot of the smaller departments look to the bigger departments as, man, wouldn't it be nice to have all those resources, have all that stuff, have all those specialty assignments. But if I'm hearing you right, like you were more empowered at the smaller department, the one station department versus going to, so talk about that. Cause I think a lot of the guys in small departments, it's like a dream to go work for a giant department where you can do a bunch of different things, but maybe not the case. Or talk about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's every place is different. The grass is always greener. The value of a large like urban department is the calls you're going to run, the experience you're going to get, because it is absolutely just crazy, the things that you're going to see and do. So you get to put all of your training to work, and then you learn things beyond just what you've trained in. You start to develop those street smart, skills after you've gone, to 50, 60 fires in the same type of structure, a 2-story, 2,500 square foot, like mill house or whatever it is in your territory. You get the opportunity to make mistakes, learn from them, make corrections, and perfect, because you're not having that 1 or 2 or 5 calls a year. You're having, multiple. The technical rescue side of things, with high rises and construction and all that. So you get a ton of experience from running those calls. But I'm so glad that I went in the small department first and got the foundational training that I could put it to work, because if I hadn't, it would have just been the same basic recruit school I had at the small department and then thrown into the system. And then there's so many factors. If let's say you wanted to do rope rescue or technical rescue, you may not ever have the opportunity, because there may not be the attrition to put you in there, or you may not be in the right battalion, or what have you. There's politics everywhere, but there's definitely, it's not as easy just to carve your way out in any organization. So on the flip side of that, I always said, like, the dream size fire department would be like a really close, suburb that touched an urban department that had, 10 stations or less, and then maybe had some of that territory too from the sprawl, so that you did get the calls and all of that, because you can make change a lot faster with 10 stations and 300 or 400 people than you can with, 45 stations and, a couple of thousand people. So there's pros and cons. I mean, I don't regret leaving and going to the city.
Why did you do that? Why did you leave that department?
So we consolidated with our county department. We were a small little city department, 1 station, and then the county was like 6 or 7 stations, and we consolidated. And so I went from a station in 1990 was running probably 3,000 calls a year, medical and fire, with about 5 people on duty every day, working 24/48, to a department that had staffing levels of 2 that was spread out into a more rural area. And we went to 24/72 and lost money and lost benefits. And it was really a shutdown and a takeover, like most consolidations are, even though they call them consolidations. But I went from, running 5, 6 calls a shift, staying in it, to going to a station where, I ran like, I don't know, it was like less than 30 calls in like 6 months.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So
that
it
makes
was just
sense.
it was boredom and opportunity, because I knew like Atlanta was more civil service, and like at a certain point you were eligible to take a test for driver. At another certain point you could test for lieutenant. And I knew people there, and they said, hey, look, if you make the score, you get the promotion. It's not, they have to promote right off the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was the main reason. That, was pay and benefits, retirement.
Yeah.
And then that allure, like you were talking about, that, man, the big city, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. We had a battalion chief from FDNY on the show a couple episodes ago, and he was talking about, we had another, him and one of the local fire chiefs from our town next door to us, and they were talking about T-shirts, because Chief Hamilton was wearing a T-shirt that he's very like progressive and forward thinking. And he's like, yeah, we're wearing this all the time. Like no uniform while we're wearing this T-shirt or whatever. And the battalion chief from New York was like, it would literally take me 18 months to get even close to the right person who would give me the permission to say you could wear a T-shirt on duty. It was just the difference between, but FDNY also has like, the reason they were on is they have like a dedicated counseling crisis intervention team with the staff and personnel.
Oh yeah. A video training
duty.
unit. The resources are crazy.
Yeah. Derrick, can you, next time you come on, I'm going to have to ask you to talk a little less, because
I'm just kind of following your lead, and, just listening to Chief here. I did have a question though, Chief, for you in regards to, that finding outside that scratching that itch for those hard chargers going outside. And it's my understanding that with for the Georgia smoke, kind of segues into that Georgia smoke diver program. And I looked at it a number of years ago, and it's a pretty rigorous program that requires pretty significant physical fitness standards. And so as far as that goes, how did you go about connecting with those people? Is this just a bunch of people that you knew from neighboring departments or within your own organization that came together and said, let's do this and let's up our game with training? Or was this something that was already established and you found your way into it? How did that come about?
So at that department I started at in Conyers, there was about 20 paid people, and 15 of them were smoke divers and 10 of them were instructors in the program. And so if you didn't go, then you weren't in the in crowd, and it was everybody. They had the patch they wore, so they were a little bit different. And you're like, what is that? And it kind of resembles like a ranger, Army Ranger type patch. So you knew there was something there that was just a little bit different. And back then it was a lot more secretive, because it was definitely a gut check, but they didn't tell you what you were going to do. They just said you needed to be in shape. You had to run 1.5 miles. You'd pass the test, like the NFPA test. You had to pass that to get in on the first day. Then you had to put your air pack on in 30 seconds and be breathing air. And you had to do a couple other things. So those were the things I practiced. I ran and did bleachers and things like that. And then you get there and it's like, holy crap, what did I just signed up for, Army Ranger School or something. And there's about a 40% graduation rate in the class, but it's evolved over the years. It started in 78. And the person who started it was an Army Ranger, and they went to another similar program and then brought things back. But it was just wanting to be good, wanting to be a part of that group, and wanting to, be an instructor at some point. And so it was, hanging around with folks that were like programmed to be mentors.
Oh,
and now it's evolved. So now it's, I took it over in 1995, and then we had a 10-year, gap where we didn't have a place to do the program. And then we started it back in 2005, and we changed it more into it's definitely a leadership. It's tactical in some regards, but we're using fire drills to teach you how to overcome adversity and how to deal with issues and how to think, how to lead small groups and that kind of thing. So it's more than just your average, like a RIT class or survival. We're going much deeper in the head than anything else that's out there. So,
wow, yeah, I kind of want to sign up, but it seems like
I will say it is a young man's sport. I'm glad I went when I did.
Yes, sir.
But it's doable. I think the oldest we had a 52 year olds come out. They were freaks though. One of them graduated on Friday, went back to his department, flew out Saturday to LA, and was part of a bicycle team that rode from LA to Miami over the next several weeks.
Oh, wow.
After a week I was like, that guy's a freak. There's not enough power bars.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. This is Joe from Ventura Fire Foundation. We have an exciting lineup of free webinars for firefighter families in 2024. In November, Tiffany Atala, marriage and family therapist and firewife, will speak to the unique challenges of parenting in fire families. The webinars are open to fire families throughout the U.S. and will be held on Zoom. There are limited seats available though, so register soon. You can register on our website or through the link in the show notes. All of the webinars will be recorded and made available on our website and YouTube channel. Support from Vanguard Charitable made this series possible, and we thank them. Now back to the show.
So when I was doing my preparation for our show today, I was listening to your speech where you were talking about the culture war in the fire service. Talk a little bit about that, because that's interesting to me.
So I guess 20 years ago, we kind of made a turn in, it was the fire department. The mission statement said to save lives and property, and everybody, held their hand up and took an oath to, put others before themselves and, not be afraid to take risk and all that. And then we went like berserk with this total risk averse mentality that was, it was just entrenched in a philosophy that all injuries were preventable, all line of duty deaths were preventable. And, the pendulum just swung way, way, way to the risk averse side. And, fire chiefs would have something happen in their organization. It may have been a line of duty death or whatever. And they were like shunned from the establishment in the leaders. And obviously we know there's a group of folks that are out there among our ranks that are reckless and do some dumb stuff. But there's also a group out there that are very much, in tune with risk management. They're very good at fire behavior, building construction, and they take the time to learn, and they're able to do things that to an untrained person look very risky, but they are calculated and controlled. And I think, unfortunately, there was a group of leaders in the fire service that put everybody that was somebody who knew the job well and could perform. They took all of those people and lumped them in with the folks that were very reckless and just created this picture that we were all, intentionally killing ourselves or, getting injured on purpose, just because it was macho or whatever. And it wasn't the case. And I think that at that same time, the academies started just teaching the basics, and they didn't have time to be innovative. They lost staffing. And so by the time you did all your EMS recert hours, your fire recert hours, and the HR required training of the day. There was no time for advanced search training. There was no time for, advanced fire dynamics and that kind of stuff. And so the skill level plummeted. And we also had a big surge of EMS becoming the leading call volume of the organization. So a big shift to a lot of EMS training. And I think we finally reached a point, and again, it kind of goes back to all these people that have their own training companies and all of that. They're doing that because they can't get advanced level training at a state academy, a local academy, or the national academy. They can't get it. So it's almost like this society has formed to keep the fire service core mission alive outside of the government organizations. And, smoke divers was a state class until probably 10 years ago. And we're totally private now because of some of the issues with the state and what we could do and couldn't do. And it had nothing to do with following standards. It just had to do with what they would let us do and the type of equipment that we were allowed to use. And so I think there is a culture war. We still have some reckless folks out there that we have to hold accountable and tasked to, but I think we are finally turning the corner and getting back to, hey, we can't take 15 minutes to size up this structure and wait until we've got every single checkbox checked and in place. It's like sometimes we just got to jump in the freaking window and make the rescue. Mm-hmm. And I always use the analogy especially when I'm speaking with chiefs. They'll have these policies and all in place where you have to have initial RIT crew before you can go in. You got to have a water supply. You got to have this. You got to have that. You got $20,000 worth of gear on. You got a thermal imaging camera that's $10,000. You got all of this equipment and all of this training and investment, and they won't let you use it until all of these risks have been hypothetically removed. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, in the same mentality, if that firefighter was on a medical call at an apartment complex and looked and saw a kid face down in the bottom of the pool, would allow them to jump in with no training, no equipment, no plan or anything and rescue that kid in the most risky IDLH environment there is, because you can't breathe underwater. And they would allow them to pull that kid out and make that rescue, and they would be touted as a hero. But on the flip side, a guy goes in with a crew, with a hose line, but everything's not perfect or checked off, and gets written up for being reckless, or being a freelancer or whatever. We have sensationalized firefighter deaths without truly analyzing them to the point where everything's lumped into one. And if you look at it, I looked at the other day and we're pretty low this year, but only like there's only like 6 that are actually line of duty deaths on a fire, on an incident. There's a lot of tanker rollovers, on mountain roads. There's a lot of 87-year-old volunteer has heart attack on the fire scene. And I mean, not to take away anything from their service or whatever, but if you lump everything in there and then you're saying you can't ventilate a roof, you can't search or whatever, that's really not where the risk is. The risk is in having your physical, your medical exams and looking for heart abnormalities and AFib and your diet. And that's the risk. And that kind of frustrates me still.
Yeah, I got a story to back up what you're saying. So we're a coastal town, and we have, 6, 7 miles, 10 miles of coast. I don't know what the exact number is anymore, but we have lifeguards that are run by the state of California, and typical large bureaucratic thing. They're constantly cutting them and reducing the hours, and then they weren't there. They were there. So the fire department was like, hey guys, like we need lifeguards on the beaches. we can't play these games. We're going to start providing a rescue swimmer. So we put rescue swimmers on our engines. They were firemen. We just trained them. And a lot of the firemen around here have lifeguarding experience. Anyway, long story short, the powers that be at the time, this was years ago, started trying to apply firefighting tactics to lifeguard rescues. So there was a fact, I vividly remember this when I first got on the fire department. There was a faction of our leaders at the time who were like, no, you can't get in the water until you have your RIC team ready. and so then the guys were like, that's not how lifeguarding works. If somebody's drowning, like you just get in there and you get them and you pull them out. They went round and round and round. And this is a perfect example of what you're talking about. Like, here we are, we're in this crazy environment, but it's totally acceptable to just go out there and swim and hope you don't drown or whatever. And you do the job you got to do because it's time sensitive and it has to be done. And then you have these old fire department hats going, nope, we can't do it. We got to wait 10 minutes for the next engine. And by then everybody's dead type of a thing. So it's a perfect example of what you're talking about. And yeah, I never really looked at it from that perspective on.
And we know now, you know, what I love is I came up in, you know, obviously mid 80s and through the 90s, and somewhere in the late 90s and early 2000s was, we got to make data driven decisions. We got to have the data. Like, we can't just say this, we got to have the data. Well, data is easily manipulated for an agenda. And so I think as we started getting some data, you know, the way you ask for certain things, it controls the outcome, obviously, right? So you could create a survey and put it out to your members and get a pretty good idea of what you're going to get back, like by the way you ask the questions. And so now that technology is such that these firefighters from their, you know, bonus room or basement can create surveys and have access to the internet to research and all, they're giving us data that's telling us a fire victim in the fire environment is the same as a person underwater. And so if we look at the data we're getting now, it's clear that if we can make that rescue and it doesn't even really take into response time, it's from the time the first unit gets on the scene. If you can get that person out in like 4 minutes, they have almost an 80% chance of survival.
Yeah.
And so that should be driving our tactics, not remaining safe as a benchmark of driving our tactics. Because what does that actually mean? You know,
it means you do nothing.
And unfortunately, there's not a lot of people that can actually have that conversation without the emotions of, well, you got to have 2 in, 2 out. You got to have so and so. We all know that every incident is situational. Yeah. But if we're getting data that's showing the chances of that person surviving is higher, then we need to make adjustments. We need to figure out how to make adjustments without swinging the pendulum too far back the other way.
Well, that's one of the hardest medium. This is the hardest thing to do in the fire department is make adjustments, change, right? Like that's the things they don't want to do. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Change in the way things are.
Yeah. It's also why the cops run in on the active shooters and they handle those tactically different now too, because they figured, oh, yeah, it's unsafe to go chase a guy with a gun, but it's, you know, we're going to kill him and then he's not going to kill all the kids in the school.
Yeah,
you know?
That's a perfect example. Unfortunately, somebody wrote an article the other day with the exact opposite position saying that, you know, we're not like cops or military, but yeah, we're not typically fighting a person. We're fighting the fire or the engulfment or the hazard, the atmosphere or whatever. But the mentality has to be the same in making the rescue. And this is the reason the police now, after a lot of failures, know to rush in and engage. It at least disrupts the gunfire. It makes them go on the defensive instead of being offensive. And it's the same for us. We're against a different opponent, but time is against the victim in both scenarios. So we have to interact very quickly. And that doesn't mean that we're, you know, taking unnecessary risk all the time.
And then with that, I mean, you talk about this culture war and this sort of with risk adverse mentality, and in your FDIC speech, you were talking about, those people who are the revolutionaries that want to change. They need to move up and promote. Well, and you talk about this idea of unity, and do you see in organizations that you've run across, or if you've talked to in your travels with people with where does it start? Does it start at the operator level, at the guys on the ground? Is it a problem that needs to be changed from the ground up in terms of our interpersonal relationships and how we mentor new firefighters? Or is it more from the top down of able to embrace change and to take new ideas and for the chiefs themselves to go out and learn? Or is it a combination of both? Because you can have these guys like we talk about who go to these classes who are hard chargers, and we have them in our organization and bring back nozzle forward and, active shooter involvement training and all these other elements that we have both in fire, EMS, and rescue. And we bring them to the chiefs and go, here, this is new. This is what so is doing. It's this effective. Here's the data. And they go, well, this is against our policy and it's too much work and we don't have the bandwidth to do this, or whatever the reason may be. And it just stops. Yeah. And so how do you mitigate? I mean, where does it, where do you see I hate to make it generalizations, but the common cause, is it the lack of buy-in from the group, or is it the lack of sort of the stubbornness or the inability to change of the administration that's causing these issues and these?
Definitely a combination, because you've got some organizations that have chiefs that are super involved and ready to make change, and then the body is against any kind of change. And, we've always done it this way. And then you have the exact reverse. You have people in the body that's out and innovative and all. And again, they're sort of outpacing the administration with knowledge and skills and ability. And so, there needs to be people in the organization that can bridge those gaps. And those are unique individuals that can not get emotional about an issue and come up with a strategy. So if, maybe it's a union president in one area, and they're listening to the members about what's happening, and they're the guide. They're like, well, look, the administration will not respond to this. So what we need to do is we've got to educate them, and nothing ever happens as fast as we want it to. So maybe there's a long-term strategy. I'll give you a prime example. The CPAT system. Mm-hmm. In Georgia, the standard was the NFPA 1001, standard forever. And every department required you to pass that in order to get on. Well, a group of chiefs got together and they said, hey, since ADA has been passed, and this was probably early 90s, they said, our test to get on the fire department doesn't really meet the ADA standards. And so we need to do away with it. There was only one fire chief in the entire group that said, no. We don't need to do away with it until we have something to replace it. Even though it's not perfect, it is a standard that is helping. If we have no standard, then you can just hire anybody,
right?
And so anyway, he lost. They did away with the standard. I happened to become union president just a year or so after that, and that's when the CPAT, the IFC, the IFF were working together with the CPAT group. And I think it was 8 cities at first. And I was very interested in that because it was job related skills. And so we couldn't get any chiefs interested in it, even though it was a partnership between the IFC and the IFF. We couldn't. And so we sat down with a couple of folks, and we talked to the IFF about how it was developed. And they were like, there's not a fire chief in the world that doesn't listen to Alan Brunacini. And we were like, yeah. They were like, we can get Alan Brunacini to come out and we'll set up the CPAT and all. So we invited every fire chief in the state of Georgia to come to our union facility, which was against probably 90% of them's will. But we had Alan Brunacini come in to speak about CPAT because he was one of the founding departments that was involved in the study. That's actually how I met Alan and became lifelong friends, like many people, with him. So I picked him up at the airport, brought him and got him to his hotel and sort of hosted him. And he got up and the general president was there. We had the members from the U.S. Division of the labor that came, the civil rights division, and they spoke, and within 6 months, departments started adopting CPAT. We put on a full demonstration and all that. But if that had been me giving the presentation, no fire chief would have come. If it had been just about anybody else, nobody would have come. So you have to find somebody that's trusted sometimes to deliver the message, and you have to have a strategy other than just. Is this the right thing? And that's again, another frustrating part to be is when you know something is right, but you can't convince the other people that it's right to do it. And so when that case, you got to look out for outside ways and come up with a strategy. So, but I do think on the other end, there's a lot of departments that they will let fire chiefs be part of NFPA committees because, you have to pay your own way to those things and all. So they have the travel budget and all. They're not going to let some firefighter, way down the totem pole go to NFPA meeting. It's going to be a chief officer or something. And I think the NFPA has a responsibility to have some type of outreach to get operators in their systems. And, I got a buddy that's heavy into rope rescue, and he never got higher than captain in the fire department. And he freaking paid his own way. He was so into it to go to NFPA. And I'm telling you right now, had it not been for him, he was the only person in there with a street practical experience. If he hadn't have been in there, your NFPA certified technical rescue gear would have been structural bunker gear.
Oh my God.
Because everybody else was at a level, it's just like, they just wear their turnout gear because they weren't having to do it. Yeah. And just him having that perspective changed the whole committee's, outlook. And that was years and years ago. But it's important to have those perspectives for sure. And you have to find out. You got to read your own organization and figure it out. But, you ought to have little strategy meetings with your little 10% group. And, John Boyd called it OODA looping. Ben Franklin had the group he called the Junto that just met just to discuss ideas and stuff. And you leverage relationships. It's all relationship based. And typically the firefighter or the union president and the chief are adversarial to some degree because of something. And where they're not is where you see the greatest progress, like the old Phoenixes and the old, the Indianapolises and those. You see those true partnerships between labor and management.
Yeah. I like that you say go outside of your department because we get just in our own little worlds and we think that this is the only, whatever we need to do to fight this fight is going to come from right here. And that's a perfect example of not like, and I think you talk about it in your thing about chess, not checkers as well. Like you're playing chess, you're not playing checkers. Like if we don't have the tools we need to make this happen here, like what leverage can we exert on the leaders to get them to yield and agree to some of this stuff? Yeah. Yeah.
And you need to encourage everybody to get out, like, not just the firefighters, but the fire chiefs. Everybody needs to get outside of their organization and see what's happening. And back to the small department, large department, the large departments are some of the worst at not letting their people go outside to things because, we've got all these resources. Why do we need to send somebody to that conference? They got guys from, little 3-station department teaching classes on search. What can they teach us?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Chief, are you still in Georgia or where are you at?
Yeah.
Did the hurricane affect you at all or?
the eye of that hurricane, of course, it was downgraded to a tropical storm probably 80 miles before it got to me. It went just east of me. And so we got heavy rain and a little bit of wind after it passed, but everything to the east of me got like hammered. They're still without power over on the coast, like from Valdosta all the way up to Augusta. Tree damage and flooding and all. And it looks like from what I'm seeing is that like North Carolina may be some of the worst up in the mountains, like Asheville, North Carolina, and some of those areas.
Yeah,
one area lost the top of an entire mountain, slid off into the valley. So
crazy.
It was rough, but I got very lucky not to have any damage other than some little yard work to do.
I noticed on your bio you were part of an incident management team. Mm-hmm. Are they? Yep. I would assume that someone's being activated for all this, or
now I'm not any longer, but I was one of the founding members for the Georgia Emergency Management Agency Type 3 incident management team, and I was on there probably 10 years.
Do you miss that piece of it?
Oh, I love doing that. That was it's so challenging, and I liked going into the disaster areas, meeting with the mayors or the fire chiefs and saying, what's your priority? What do you need done? And then building that system. They're like, oh my God, how do you guys get this done? And, that's where I learned a lot about the relationship piece too, is like, you go in with a type 3 team, well, even a type 1 team, you can't run the whole town. So you pick what you can do. You might have to request a couple of more teams depending on the workload. But if they say we need to get all the houses searched and the roads clear, you're like, I'm on it. And you go build a plan and start putting the resources together. And, it's amazing what you can get done in a couple of days in one of these things like tornadoes or hurricanes.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about the negative side of the fire service in our conversation, but the reality is that's what we're really good at. You give us a problem, whether it's a fire or a hurricane or whatever, we're going to go in there and we're going to get stuff done in a short period of time. That is the strength of the fire service. And it's amazing when you're on these larger incidents and you see the way this is going. People, like you said, they're amazed, like how in the heck? We don't know what to do. And then that's just what we do. And that's where we function the best. Like that's our highest and best use of firefighters.
We're very adaptable and we can improv with tools and equipment. And I think our risk there is we can't apply the same strategy to a fire that we're going to be in and out of in 2 hours to an incident that we're going to be on for days, or somebody's not going to get to eat and they won't have anywhere to sleep. So you got to get into that, long term. There's a lot of logistics involved in sustaining that effort. But I think that's, if somebody's looking to get better as an officer, get better as a commander or whatever, is getting involved in the incident management system. It teaches you a lot about how to build systems and processes that are sustainable. We're all good at the one and done, we can go to that house fire, knock it out, roll up, get back to the station, cook dinner. But when you got to have somebody get in hotel rooms or shelters or showers or whatever, man, that logistics guy becomes the most valuable guy in the world. Well,
it's been a pleasure having you on. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share your wisdom and your stories. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad you're here, and I wish you a long, prosperous retirement, although it doesn't sound like you're really retired at all.
Didn't work out so well. I think I'm working and traveling more now than ever, but it's good though. I really enjoy it, and it's a good chance to continue to contribute and have your, hands in the activity without having to do the shift life and having the exposures.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, Derrick, any parting words?
Yes, sir. Just thank you very much for your time. And I hopefully will make my way out to Georgia to attend one of those smoke diver classes.
Come on out.
And, yes, sir. And I'll
hope to see both of you guys at FDIC maybe.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I plan on it.
All right. See you.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
All right. Well, that was an interesting conversation we had with Chief Rhodes. There was some perspectives he had, which I never really thought about. Specifically, the one of, you have like the 10% of people who do all the things, and depending on the culture that is at the department, they're either the rebels and being disciplined, or they're the guys who are making change and everybody, loves what they're doing. Like it's the activities are the same. It's just, what is their organizational culture? And that kind of dictates that. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And I the whole idea of that, you mentioned it with the culture wars and being involved outside of your agency if you're running into problems like that. I mean, that's something that, especially personally for me, I put up a lot of irons in the fire at Ventura, and it's been nice to kind of do the Ventura Fire Foundation because in that aspect of being able to serve outside the confines of bureaucracy and chiefs and captains telling you, no, you can't do that. And kind of even your own peers kind of poo-pooing if you're being that hard charger. And so it was really interesting. And also to talk about like that risk averse mentality in terms of how like firefighters operate. I wish we could have gone a little bit further into like how that affects like morale amongst firefighters, and like how having like having that sort of battle between the management and the line guys, whether for whatever reason, how that translates into like department morale and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that the foundation is a kind of a departure from the confines of the fire department. When we started it back, I don't know however many years ago that was, everyone was frustrated with how hard it was to get things done, how change was, not the popular topic. So the foundation's incredibly nimble. We can do whatever. I shouldn't say we can do whatever we want, but it's way more freedom to act and change and pivot than the fire department has. The downside is we have to beg for money. The fire department has a steady stream of a steady budget that allows them to do what they do. And obviously that's how it should be, but it is nice having an organization that is flexible, who we can do what needs to be done. It's a lot like running. I mean, it is running a business. We're just a not-for-profit business, but it's still a business. You still have to have money coming in. You still have to control your expenses. You still, all those things. But I'm glad you're on the foundation. I'm looking forward to what you're going to contribute, and I'm glad to hear that you're looking forward to a little more influence and ability to maneuver outside of the department. That's encouraging as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this foundation does so much good for not just the people within the county, but it's also for firefighters and their families outside. And the plans that we have going forward to expand even further beyond the confines of just our general area and even our state is really, really exciting. And something I'm really excited to be a part of, and also this podcast.
Awesome. The other thing that I want to talk about, what he talked about when he was telling that story about how they were trying to get the CPAT, and how they were just resistance from all their chiefs. And he played a strategic game. He's like, okay, I'm going to bring in the most influential fire chief in the country, and I'm going to have him beat you up about this stuff, and then I'm going to get you. And that's exactly what he did. And I don't think a lot of our firefighters think that strategically. Like, typically they're not political. They're not like trying to make political moves, but maybe they should be. That was an interesting story he told.
Well, yeah. And then it's also like you have these like-minded people, and it doesn't sound like it's something that he had to come hat in hand to him and go, hey, you need to help me out. He probably was just asked and said, yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's the reason why these people create these outside training facilities and these opportunities and become influentials, because they want to affect that change. So it's kind of nice to know that, for me, in my back pocket, is to know that there's people out there such as Chief Rhodes, who you probably can call him up and go, hey, could you endorse X, Y, and Z? And if he agrees with you, he's like, absolutely. It's could be that easy, essentially. So
for sure. Well, we're at risk of starting another little podcast discussion here, but anyhow, thanks for coming on and helping us out with the hosting. And we hope to have you on more and more for sure. And glad you're on board.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.